All right, Josh, I emailed you and I told you that prior to this book, I had never heard of you. And I have to tell you, after reading this book, I think that I will read every book you've ever written, and I will read every next book that you write, because this is literally one of my favorite books of the year. It's fantastic. You did such a great job of telling stories and rooting powerful concepts into this book that I recently posted inside of my team. So I run like a strategy marketing type agency. I've got about 30 people on my team. And I shared the picture of the cover of your book in our private group. And I pulled out a few things that I loved from the book. And I offered to buy everybody in our community a copy of the book if they want to read the book with me and dissect what big little breakthroughs we can incorporate into this business. So I feel like this is a book that will be a resource that I will use forever. So thank you for saying yes to this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thank you for those lovely, kind words. As an author, you pour your heart into it and you hope people will like it. You hope it will be impactful. And I'm grateful to be with you and grateful you chose to read the book. And very, very sweet of you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. So I'm curious, I have questions for you about the book, but in reading about you, I love your bio. You're a creative troublemaker. You've been the founder and CEO of 5 tech companies, which sold for a combined value of over $200 million, and you're the author of 4 books. So my first question for you in terms of building, growing, and exiting companies is what big little breakthrough, what principle in the book do you think has allowed you to do that? Because everyone that is part of Thought Readers is a business owner. And a lot of those people aspire to one day sell their business. I have sold a business before, and I know that the value of your business is based on a number of things. And so I'm curious as to, if you were to look at your own experience in successfully selling companies, what's the number one driver you would take from the book that people should be thinking of?
It's hard to identify one. I mean, just for context, for those that haven't read the book, I spent about 1,000 hours in research and interviews with people all over the globe with a specific question in mind. How do innovators tick? Like what makes somebody creative? And could it be a learned skill? So I interviewed CEOs and billionaires and celebrity entrepreneurs and Grammy award-winning musicians with the goal of understanding what are the mindsets and tactics and habits of the most creative people on the planet. And so what you're referencing is in the back half of the book, it kind of revealed these 8 core mindsets or obsessions of what I call everyday innovators. And I believe that all of us, by the way, can be everyday innovators. Many of those principles, though, Lisa, are actually directly tied to entrepreneurial success. Happy to unpack any of them, but some, for those that haven't heard of them, are start before you're ready. Absolutely a crucial skill for anyone trying to build or scale a business. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution, which is all around really being committed to solving something for your customers by any means necessary, and being willing to let go of one way of doing it in favor of another one. Another one talks about break it to fix it, which is the notion of taking a hard look at how things have always been done and challenging yourself to do the opposite, really, to shake things up, even when things appear to be working just fine. Another one in there is fall 7 times, stand 8, which is a Japanese proverb, which is essentially around resilience and the intersection of resilience and creativity. So while it's difficult to extract like one lesson learned, I think all of those principles really allowed me over the last 30 some years to start, build, and scale, and ultimately sell companies.
So, I've been running this book club for, I don't know, I think it's 5 years now. And one of the things that comes up, questions that people ask me all the time, is when they read a book, and, in your case, you do have these 8 obsessions, and they read all of those 8 things, they get stuck on where to start. And so they read the book and they have all these ideas while they're reading the book, and then they finish the book and they set the book aside, and then it's almost like they have reader's guilt because they don't know where they should start. And so I know you have a lot of resources on your website to go with the book. Next year's Thought Readers program is what I'm coining the classics, where I'm bringing back some of the books that I read over and over again. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to bring this one back because I feel like there was so much to do in this book that I need to read it multiple times. So I guess my question for you is, for busy entrepreneurs who are in the day-to-day of running their business and they want to be more creative and they want to innovate, how do they use this book? Where should they start?
Well, thank you again. I'm very grateful for your fascination with the book. That's awesome. I think it really gets into, if you want to learn any new skill, whether it's tennis or jazzercise or whatever, like cooking, you kind of got to think, what are the mindsets, what are the habits, and what are the tactics of those that you want to emulate? And so that's what the book is about. But there are some really easy places to start. I really tried to make it a practical and pragmatic book. So it's not like all dreamy, head in the clouds and go think big thoughts. It's like, all right, what do you physically do when you wake up in the morning? And I'm happy to share a couple of things that you can do. First thing I would recommend someone does is try this. There's a lot of stuff in the book. There's really tactical things to try. Try this for like 3 weeks. Wake up in the morning and spend 2 minutes a day. 2. In the book, I did something that's a little longer called 5, but just think about 2 minutes. Minute number 1, spend 1 minute, what I say, guzzling inputs, which is essentially bathing in the creativity of others. Maybe you watch a great band on YouTube. Maybe you read a poem out loud. Maybe you stare at a piece of art. But all you're doing is sort of immersing yourself in the creativity of others. It gets your juices flowing. The second thing, for your second 1 minute of the day, it's taking me more than 2 minutes to explain the exercise, but the second minute is I call it the unrelated problem. Open up a newspaper or wherever you get your news, pick any topic out there. And don't try to solve it. It's got to be unrelated to your profession. So it can't have like direct implications on you or your business or anything. You say, okay, if I had to try to make some difference in that problem, what might I do? So today we might open it up and see the spread of COVID, and that's terrible. And oh my gosh. So again, it's not the cure for COVID. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm saying, what are some small ideas that you could do to chip away at that problem? Maybe one would be educational programs to encourage more mask wearing, or some information so people can make thoughtful choices about vaccination or whatever. So all you're doing is it's like jumping jacks for your creativity. You're taking an unrelated problem that has no direct impact on you or your career or anything, and challenging yourself to be creative. Maybe you say, the Olympics just were in the past. What could I have done to win an Olympic gold medal if I was coaching somebody? Or you might say, travel is down in New York City. If I had to boost travel in New York City, what might I do to help that problem? So you just take an unrelated problem and give yourself the creative freedom to sort of noodle on it. 2 minutes a day. You do that for 21 days in a row, it will form a habit, and you will instantly see an expansive growth in your creative capacity.
I love that, because you're basically stretching your brain to think about things that you wouldn't really think about. And by doing that, I think it allows you to start to think about problems in your own business differently because you've built that muscle, right? If I start thinking about, geez, how would I get Americans out of Afghanistan if I was in charge? Or how would I fix the problem that such and such an airline has? Like, these are things that I know nothing about, but it would force me to think differently. And when you think differently, that's what's going to allow you to innovate in your business. Am I getting it?
Perfectly said. And the thing is this, most of us think about, if you're going to learn a language, you'd say, I'd have to learn the language. It's a skill. But with creativity and innovation, people think you're either born with it or you're not. That's one of the most heartbreaking things, because that's not it at all. I like to say that innovation, creativity, it's much more like your weight than your height. So I'm a pretty short guy, and no matter how hard I try, probably not going to grow a foot by next month. That'd be cool, but I don't think it's going to happen. But my weight I can control based on what I eat, nutrition, etc. Creativity is exactly like that. All human beings, and the research is crystal clear, all of us have enormous reservoirs of dormant creative capacity. We're hardwired as human beings to be creative. It's not for one of a lucky few, it's for all of us. But it's a skill that needs to be developed. Just like I don't speak Hebrew, I bet if I practice it for many years, I could learn to speak Hebrew. Same thing is true with creativity. Even if you haven't practiced it for years, since you were in kindergarten, it's a skill that you can quickly build and learn. And so that's what I encourage people to do, is to think of it in that context. And then you say, okay, what are some practical ways that I can bring my creativity to the surface. The other thing I'll just say quickly is that I think there's nothing more productive that we can do right now, especially in these competitive times. So, think about this. The world we're living in right now, these are turbulent, crazy times. You got COVID, but even before COVID, there's fist fighting competition. There's increasing dizzying speed. There's mind-numbing complexity. There's generational shifts, global economy. And so many of the advantages of the past have become commoditized, outsourced, or automated. And so you say, well, what's left? How can you compete as a business owner? How can you compete as a person trying to get to the next level of your career? And what I've learned is that human creativity is the single most productive asset, skill set that you can build and cultivate. In other words, we all want cool stuff in our lives, whether it's more money or more clients or career growth or whatever. The best way to get those things that you care about the most is by developing your creative capacity.
It's interesting. I just blogged about creativity myself not too long ago because I'm a high school dropout. And I am a high school dropout because I'm missing an arts credit. And so for many, many, many years, I labeled myself as not being creative. And it took me years to realize how creative I really am when it comes to the work that I do in terms of business and sales and marketing and all of that. And I recently bought myself an easel and started painting. You can see one of my second painting in the corner there, that pink thing, which was, I read this thing on Instagram that this artist said, and she said, when you start painting, the first thing that you should do is paint the ugliest painting you can paint. Because if you actually are intentionally trying to make something that's really ugly, then you will get out of your own way when it comes to starting. And then from there, everything else will be better than what you started with. So I love hearing what you say about creativity, because I really do believe we all have it. You just have to learn how to tap into it. So,
but real quickly though, you touched on something that I just love, and I just want to build on it. So most of us, when we're trying to generate ideas, now we're just getting into tactics for a second, we use brainstorming. But brainstorming is a terribly out of date and ineffective technology. It's a bad technique, largely because fear creeps in the room and you only share your safe ideas, not your big ideas. It needs to go. So I developed a series of 13 techniques with lots of years of trial and error that are better. I call them idea jamming. But one of them, the reason I bring it up is I call it the bad idea brainstorm. So when you get in a room with your colleagues and you're trying to come up with some cool new idea, there's all this pressure and you're bound by incrementalism. So you share your puny little ideas. This is a much better technique. It's a two-part process. First, set a timer for like 10 minutes, and everybody brainstorms not the best idea they can think of, the worst idea they can think of. What's a terrible idea? What's immoral or unethical or illegal? Just like you said, paint an ugly picture. And then what happens is people's energy goes up, the whiteboards are filled with bad ideas. Step two, crucially, you don't do the bad ideas, of course not. But then you examine them and say, is there a little something in there? Is there a little nugget that I could kind of flip around in a way to make the bad idea a good one? Is there a little way I could polish that idea to make it appropriate instead of inappropriate? And so sometimes by starting with a list of bad ideas, you actually end up with far better ideas than had you skipped that step of the process altogether. So anyway, it's exactly what you're talking about, the bad idea approach.
Yeah, I read that in the book where you said there was, you call it something to the edge. Like there's a term that you used, and I think the example you gave is, what if we doubled everybody's salary? And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I kept reading and you brought us back in, which I thought was really good. So one of the things that I had written down is on page 104, you talk about your own creative rituals, which we've talked about a bit already, that 5-minute thing that you just distilled down into 2 minutes. Do you believe that these rituals need to be a daily occurrence?
I hate putting the word need with just about most things in life, but I do think that for a habit to form, the more regular you do it, the better. If someone does it 5 days a week instead of 7 days a week, it's fine, obviously. But the point is that you really try to make it a habit. And in James Clear's book, which I just love, the Atomic Habits book, he said that habits are good decisions on autopilot. And I think that's such a great way to think about it. Like if you just do that habitually, you don't even think about it. You're just building. Again, it's like jumping jacks for your creativity. You're building your creative muscle mass. So it doesn't have to be every day. If you miss a day, you're not going to turn into a goon. But the more that you sort of make creativity a part of your daily life, the more you will develop those skills.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Keith Cunningham and his book, The Road Less Stupid. Are you familiar with Keith?
I'm not, but the name sounds great. That's awesome.
So are you familiar with Rich Dad Poor Dad
Yeah, of
and
course.
Robert Kiyosaki? So Robert Kiyosaki's rich dad was Keith Cunningham. And
Oh, cool.
so Keith Cunningham wrote the book, The Road Less Stupid. And the whole book is really geared around thinking time. And so when you talk about these creative rituals, it makes me think about thinking time, but thinking time without attachment, thinking time for just building that creative muscle of being able to sit with ideas and kind of play with those ideas. And I think that's great. But if I go back to my initial question, which is, how do people use the book? If I'm going to start by just those creative ideas without implementation don't really affect my business. So what do you have any advice on the best way to implement one of the 8 obsessions? Or before you move to the 8 obsessions, should you be looking at part 1? Like when I wrote inside of my community for my team, some of the things that I highlighted that I liked the most about the book is I loved fall in love with the problem. I loved open a test kitchen and the idea of experimentation. We're actually running an experiment with a client over the next 90 days to see how that affects our work in comparison to how we normally do it. I loved break it to fix it, because I think there are a lot of things that you do. And over the years, it might have been good 5 years ago, but today it's an old process that needs to be rethought. And of course, I love the Ditterment philosophy of how do you deliver extra. So on the implementation side, what advice do you give people if they actually want to integrate some of this into their business?
Yeah, we're a good question. Where a lot of people go wrong when you're talking about implementing innovation or ideas is they miss a crucial step. So they think, most people, it's not a criticism, the way we generally think is like, come up with an idea, and the next logical step is global implementation. So if you have a company of 5,000 people, like, here's an idea, okay, everybody go do that idea. Problem is you're missing a critical step in the middle, and you referenced it. There's a step in the book I call open a test kitchen, which is really around a culture of experimentation. A better approach than going from ideation to wide scale execution is an experimentation phase in the middle. Think about how the COVID vaccine was developed. I'm pretty sure there wasn't some dude in a corner office somewhere at Pfizer who comes up with some idea and like, Eureka, I've got it, go print 1 billion doses. Like, there's no way, it'd be crazy. What happens is people have ideas, but then they're tested in a lab. And the ones that don't work out are discarded. The ones that do are refined. And through a systematic approach of experimentation, we're able to bring ideas to the surface quickly and safely. In other words, lower risk. That is exactly the way that we should be thinking about any type of innovation. Even if it's something like, how can I change my sales pitch or my proposal format in my small business? Or how could I change the way I do performance reviews? Don't just come up with an idea and then make it, the global forever best practice. Try it. And so I think when we insert an experimentation step, what happens is you greatly de-risk the creative process, and you're able to get more ideas to the better ideas to the surface faster. What I always advise people to do is, when you come up with an idea, don't even judge it. Like, it may be good, maybe not. Just say, let's run the experiment. That's like a mantra. Let's run the experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that, you want to try to say, how can I make that experiment cheap and fast? Low fidelity, crude experiments. So if you have an idea on how to give a better sales pitch, don't try it and go retrain your whole sales team or whatever. Try it with one customer on a Tuesday afternoon once and see how it goes. And if it feels right, but it wasn't perfect, okay, maybe try a little different version of it on Wednesday. But don't just go wide sweeping implementation, run the experiment. And by the way, once an experiment shows promise, still don't just jump to wide scale implementation. Just double the size of that experiment. If it works again, double that size. So by the time you take a big bet, you've already significantly de-risked the process.
I love that. And what I would add to that is when you take that approach, you minimize your sunk cost in the experiment and your attachment to the actual experiment. Because if you do it widespread to begin with, and you've invested a lot of money, time, and resources into it, it's a lot harder to let go of the idea versus if you do it on a small scale and see that it didn't really work well, you're not as attached to it as you are if you've invested all of that money and effort into it. So that's really great. Which of the 8 obsessions which one of the 8 obsessions are you obsessed the most with?
It's such a hard question. It's like,
you have to give me one. You have to give me just one.
I have 4 kids.
Your
and it's like, which is your favorite kid?
Yeah, but different day, you have different favorite kids.
That's probably true. I really do like all of them. And to a degree, they've been my philosophy for the last 30 years in business. And I believe, they really are equally weighted. If you're asking me today to just gun to your head, pick one of them, it might be the notion of break it to fix it. I just think that too often we overestimate the risk of trying something new, but we underestimate the risk of standing still. And I think that as life changes, as business changes, as the world changes, too often we're like, hey, this has always worked. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And to me, that's terrible advice. I think we owe it to ourselves to break it to fix it. And let's examine the systems and processes and approaches that may be working just fine, but aren't optimized. And then you just sort of like challenging yourself, can I upgrade it? Is there a better version of it? Can I deconstruct it and rebuild it and make it better? And so to me, this notion of sort of being perennially discontent with the status quo, no matter how good things are, like you're just like, hey, that's great that it's working now, awesome, but like what's next? And how can I make it better? And the world's changing, so I better change too. And to me, that's a way that I try to live life. And I think it'd be really helpful to people. It's funny, as I was building my business, I built a company to about 500 people. And I had a saying, and I said it so often, I think my people were sick of hearing it. And the saying was that someday a company will come along and put us out of business. So it might as well be us. And I believe the same thing personally. Like I hope that I'm putting the Josh of 6 months ago out of business with a new version. And I hope 6 months from now, I'm doing it again. So that ongoing break it to fix it mentality, I think is very productive, especially in these challenging times.
Mm-hmm. So when you are thinking about breaking it to fix it, do you believe in the same approach, which is try breaking something where there's minimal risk to see what you're capable of before you break the biggest thing that you're doing in your business? Like, how would you approach that?
Not necessarily. I think you can start with little ones to put some points on the board. That can be a helpful thing. But the way you start with taking on a big thing is just like I said, you go back to experimentation. So let's say, a big thing that you're trying to break to fix is, hey, right now we sell to big companies, and now we want to also sell to small companies. So that would be like a pretty big thing. You're changing your whole distribution model. But again, the way to do it isn't like decide and declare it in the boardroom on Tuesday, and then Wednesday morning you go crazy. But what you do is you say, how can we experiment it? So it's to constantly ask yourself, okay, even though it's a big change, how can I test it? And say, well, what ideas do we have to go after small customers? And you might list out 100 ideas. And you say, okay, of those 100, which are our 5 favorite? And you select those 5 and you say, okay, how can we test each of these 5? Cheap and fast. Is there a crude way to test? And even if that's the beginning point. And so a lot of times, there's a quote that I open the book with, which is a Van Gogh quote, is that the greatest things in life are really just a series of connected small things. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it. And so even if you want to make a big change, that's okay to break to fix a big change. Just don't do it all at once. Break it down into small, little manageable experiments and build from there.
So I have a belief that a lot of today's, small business owners consume more than they create, and they compare more than they innovate. And so I'm going to use you as an example. Okay. I'm a small business owner. I run a business that does, a couple $1 million a year in sales, small little company. I'm in the midst of, trying to redo my website and make my website better. And I go to Josh's website and I'm like, oh my God, look at this guy's website. It's bold, it's colorful, it's different. Now I want to be like Josh. So I'm using that as an example. Business owners, I feel like we're consuming what everyone else is doing, and we're comparing where everyone else is at, instead of allowing ourselves to think freely and independently. What advice do you have for people to kind of stop following that path and give themselves permission to break it to fix it their own way?
Awesome question. And I totally agree with you. And you're right. Most people sort of follow the leader. So, I've talked to attorneys and like they wear the same Windsor knot and they have the same mahogany desk. And like, well, what makes your law firm different? Like, well, we offer great service. Nothing wrong with great service, but that's kind of like the ante to play. That like competence is not a competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll say that again, like competence is not, that is good. You have to be competent, but that in and of itself is not a competitive advantage. So the first suggestion I would have is what I call the judo flip. The judo flip is a simple exercise where you sort of take an inventory. How have you always done it in the past? How does everybody else in the industry do it? What does conventional wisdom suggest? And then you sort of draw a line down the page and ask yourself next to every one of those entries, what's the polar opposite? What would it look like if you did the completely opposite? So instead of having mahogany desks and Windsor knots, what if your entire place looked like an art studio and there was messy paint everywhere and you wore a black turtleneck? Like that, now you might not serve every client you're going after, but it would be different.
Mm-hmm.
So the judo flip is saying, okay, let's take an inventory, what everybody else is doing, and let's notice it for sure. But instead of just copying it, you say, what's the opposite? And in fact, one of the reasons my website is so colorful and so bold is I said, what do other authors and speakers generally do? They all look the same. So I'm like, how about I do exactly the opposite? So there's really a beautiful magic in judo flipping, doing the opposite of what's expected.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would suggest people do is, instead of focusing on what makes them like the same as everybody, focus on what makes you different. A friend of mine, Victoria LeBaum, has a great quote, and she says, if you can't fix it, feature it. So, for example, I'm from Detroit, and you might not think, well, that's not maybe the mecca of intellectual whatever. I'm like, yeah, I'm a proud Detroiter. I send people Detroit T-shirts. Like I'm all about Detroit. So it's something I can't fix. I feature it. And so the idea would be, if you really take an inventory and say, what makes me different and unique, instead of trying to bury that and blend in, celebrate that and double down on those differences. So when you judo flip what others are doing, number one, and number two, focus on the things that make you different rather than the things that make you blend in. That I think is a great recipe for differentiation.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I love that. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. You said you spent 1,000 hours interviewing people for this book. So my first question was, where did you find the people and these stories? Because they're all so they're so interesting and so different and so compelling. Like each story is a metaphor in its own to support the philosophies in the book. And how long? So I am a wannabe author. I have written one book, and a second book I've co-authored with someone else. And I feel like book writing is really hard. So I'm curious, because I think the book is outstanding. How long did it take you to write this book?
So just quick clarifying thing. I spent 1,000 hours in both research and interviews. It wasn't 1,000 hours of pure interviews. So
okay,
all together, including the interviews, as 1,000 hours of work. How I found those people, I did a lot of, hey, do you know anybody that knows this person? And I got rejected on many of them. But that being said, when writing a book on innovation, we'll talk about the judo flip. What would most people do? They'd focus on Apple and Netflix, and but we already know that's innovative, and everyone's already told those stories. So instead, I tried to find the stories that hadn't been told. I focused on the guy that started the drone racing league. Mm-hmm. I focused on the woman who came up with the first all-natural gum. So part of these people, besides that they were different and compelling, and I think stories worth telling, they were sort of easier to get to. So if you call an entrepreneur and they are in the middle of building their practice and say, look, I'm New York Times bestselling author. I have 1 million people on social media that follow me, and I'm writing a book. I'd like to feature you in it. It's easier to get to that person than it is to get to like the CEO of Apple. Right. So I was able to get to people, and I got many no's too, by the way. And but that's part of the fun of it, I suppose. In terms of how long does it take to write a book?
Yeah, how long does it take you to write that book?
It was a 2-year process.
2-year process.
Is that long and short of it? And a lot of that is, first deciding what's the framework and what do you want to say and what's the thesis. A lot of it is conducting the research, and then there's the writing and editing and tweaking and all that. It's a labor of love. It's a big process.
Mm-hmm. It's a huge process. One of the things that I think you do exceptionally well, and I'm wondering if you have any tips or if there's a process you use, is you're really good at naming your concepts and referring to your IP with the right name at the right time. How did you learn to do that? Is it just because you're so intimate with your, yeah, I guess there's two questions there. One, how did you decide to name some of the things the way you did? Because I think that it's definitely very unique and special to you. And then how do you train yourself as a creative person? Because I'm sure you're probably already working on the next book and you probably already have 20 more ideas. How do you train yourself as a creative person to keep those ideas top of mind?
So I'll take each of those one at a time. The first one on naming. So you're right. In the book, there's these 8 core mindsets, and I did try to name them punchy little catchphrases. And so part of it, I feel that if there are some kind of universal wisdom type things in there. But if I said, for example, go the extra mile, you would roll your eyes. You're like, no kidding. I mean, that's a good concept, but I already know that. But if I said, don't forget the dinner mint, you're like, well, what does that mean? And to a degree, they're sort of similar. It's around over delivery and finding little ways to plus up the expectations beyond. But it's more of a clever way to say it. And I don't say that to be clever. I say it so it leaves a bigger impact. It's more memorable. And so you're approaching it. Don't forget the dinner mint. What does that mean? I'm learning something new. And you see all the stories that support it. Now that lands with the reader, as opposed to if I said some cliche or platitude that they might just kind of, again, roll their eyes and skip right past. So I was deliberate in those names. And the way you come up with them is, I sort of first laid out what's the principle. What is, forget a fancy title, like what are you trying to say? And then after I came up with that and I did the research and said, this is really the principle, only then did I go back and say, all right, is there a more fun, punchy way to say the names? So one of the things that I did in this book a lot is there were a lot of cycles. Like cycle 1, I called it idea spewing, where I just sort of would write crap, like it just spewed out, it was terrible. The next one, it wasn't even like full sentences. The next pass, I'd try to make it grammatically correct. The next pass, I'd be like, okay, let's add richness and color and detail. The next patch would be, let's add some humor. And then over time, you'd like one of those passes is, can I say this in a better way? Can I use more compelling words? And so it only came to life. It wasn't that I just, flowed out I plugged it into my soul and just flowed out perfectly. It was clunky and messy, frankly, but with enough passes over it, eventually you polish it to the point where you're proud.
And then how do you remember them all? How do you retain the names? Because I know as a business owner, I've coached and advised a lot of people in the 10, 15 years that I've been doing this. I forget my own concepts. And then all of a sudden a client of mine will be like, yeah, but remember when you did this? And they'll bring something up that I forgot about. So how do you cement it into your own mind?
Well, a couple of things. One of them is when you are so immersed in a project like that, you remember it. Like I used to study music for hours and hours and hours on end. I started my career playing jazz guitar. And even if I tried, I'm not going to be able to forget how to play a G chord because I played that G chord so many times. So some of it is just being so deeply immersed in it. The other thing though, is that part of it, back to your question about names, I think it helps. So if the name was some generic thing like, work hard, like it would blend in. But so when you use language that is unique and compelling, it actually helps make it more memorable.
I think you do a really good job of recalling your own naming structures and referring to your concepts, because even the judo thing, it's not a title of one of your chapters, and it's not just the titles of the chapters or the obsessions. It's all throughout the book. You are naming things in a really, really smart way. I really like it.
Thank you. But back to your point, I think a lot of it's repetition. You're exactly right. And whether you're learning this or anything else, is that if you there's a great line that sent is not received. So if I bring my team, you mentioned you have 30 people, you bring your 30 people together and you tell them something once, you told them it, so you understood it because you said it, but doesn't necessarily, they probably understood it in the moment, but it doesn't mean it like sunk in fully. Right. So on the other hand, if you repeated it again and again, and it was something you said over time, and it was top of mind, that's going to have a much higher likelihood of really sinking in rather than just saying it once and hoping people remember it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still don't understand why they don't remember everything I say the first time. So, what is your favorite big little breakthrough story in the book?
There's so many cool ones, but probably my favorite was, again, it's like choosing your favorite kid. But So the story that I opened with was really struck me. And for those that haven't read it, I'm sure most listeners haven't. There was it turns out that cigarette butt litter is the biggest environmental challenge in central London. And in fact, in many cities around the world, it's this sort of pesky problem. People try a bunch of stuff to fix it, and there's always cigarette litter on the ground. So there's one gentleman who I interviewed named Trewin Restorick, and I'd never heard of him, but I kind of did some research and found him and connected. Coolest guy ever. And he's like a normal guy. He's not a celebrity entrepreneur. He's not a billionaire. He doesn't have 14 PhDs. He's like a normal dude. But this normal guy said, hey, I'm going to try to change this. It's bugging him. So he invented something called the ballot bin. And the ballot bin is a bright yellow metal box that's mounted on a pole. The front of it is glass, so you can see through it. And when you see through it, there's actually a divider in the middle. So there's almost like two receptacles. And at the top, it asks a two-part question, like, which is your favorite food, hamburgers or pizza? And there's a little receptacle encouraging smokers to vote with their butts. And so I see, oh, pizza, I like pizza. So I put my cigarette butt in there instead of tossing it on the ground. And I see it fall on top of the other cigarette butts. And it's almost like looking at two bar charts right next to one another. So you can see like, oh, who's in the lead. And it's low tech and it's simple and it didn't require $1 billion. But the thing is, it worked. So when these ballot bins are installed, they reduce cigarette litter by 80%. And now Trewin is in 27 countries and he's got this huge team and he's doing all this amazing stuff. And the reason I love that is that when I see Elon Musk launching a rocket ship, I say, good for Elon Musk, but it's hard to see myself in that. Mm-hmm. But when I see Trewin Restorick coming up with a ballot bin, the first thing I say is, man, I could have thought of that. And so could you. And so could we all. And so to me, it's symbolic in that creativity isn't only for the ultra wealthy, it's for us all. Mm-hmm. I define that as a big little breakthrough because it wasn't something that took 40 years of study in a lab. Like this guy figured it out in a scrappy, entrepreneurial, creative way that any one of us could have. And it makes creativity accessible. And that's what I tried to do in the book is make this a discipline and a practice that we can all get our arms around.
Mm-hmm. I love the story about Lady Gaga practicing for 6 months before a big performance, because you look at somebody like Lady Gaga and you just assume that she doesn't have to do that. You know, we assume that it just comes natural to her. And I would have never imagined that much would go into a performance for her. Did you actually interview her?
I didn't interview her. I did a bunch of research on her. But what I learned is that, when you see someone performing and they look so natural, like, oh, it's the first time she ever sang the song, but look how talented she is. And of course she's talented, but a lot of what you see when you see someone demonstrating creative mastery is a lot of hard work. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of practice. So when you see someone on Broadway, they've done that move, that little routine that looks so natural and so easy, thousands of times. It became muscle memory. So here's the challenge. When we then ourselves try something creative and it doesn't come out like Lady Gaga quality the first time we do it, we say, I'm not creative. I should give up. I should quit. But the truth is that the people that we admire so much that make it look so easy, a good chunk of the reason it's so easy is because they practice a lot. They did the reps. Yeah. And so I just don't think that if we should, as creators, and I hope all of us are thinking of ourselves as creators, we shouldn't get frustrated if the first 2 or 3 or 10 attempts isn't, legendary. It takes a while, but that's okay. And it is a skill that you're going to learn and grow and develop over time, even with a little bit of effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. One last question for you, which is, what's one story that got cut from the book that you wish you had put in the book?
Oh, God, see, that's an awesome question. No one's ever asked me that. It's the story of Jesse Cole. So Jesse Cole was 23 years old and flat broke. He had this dream, which seemed like the most crazy dream. He wanted to somehow own a sports team. But the problem was Jesse was not a billionaire's kid or whatever. Like he didn't have any contacts. The odds of that were like him winning the lotto twice. Not going to happen. But he's passionate about it. He's into sports, and he learned that 1,000 miles from his home, the minor league baseball team in Savannah, Georgia, was going bankrupt. So he goes down to Savannah, Georgia. He's the only one that shows up at the bankruptcy hearing. And not knowing what else to do, they actually let the kid have a shot. So now here he is. He's got like no money. Doesn't have any idea what he's doing. He doesn't have any experience or contact, nothing. But now all of a sudden he's in control of this professional sports team. So he actually applied many of the principles in this book. He got really creative. First thing, he started before he was ready. He didn't know what he was doing yet, but he did it anyway. He started falling in love with the problem of baseball being boring. He liked baseball, but he's like, professional game, it's kind of boring. How can I make it fun? He didn't have any resources. That one of the things I talk about in the book is he had to use every drop of toothpaste, which is basically making do with what he had. So him and his wife sold every worldly possession they owned, including their house. And he slept on an air mattress in this crumbling stadium for a year while he got the team off the ground. And so every little thing he did was exactly the principles I talk about in the book. So he ended up renaming the team the Savannah Bananas. It's a name you couldn't forget. They're dressed in bright yellow. It's like crazy. And he made it kind of like a circus. So for example, the first base coach, he told me, first base coaches don't even do anything. So he hired a breakdancer. So the guy, he looks like he's like standing at first base, but then in between every play, he's like jumping around doing these amazing dances. He instead of objectifying, so one of the things, he'd break it to fix it. Examine all the rules and judo flip them. So for example, most professional sports teams have like these scantily clad young women, sex objects cheering the team on. He did the opposite. He has a team, a troop of senior citizen women called the Savannah Nanas. And the Savannah Nanas are dancing and cheering and have a great time. The other cheerleaders they have are the Dad Bod cheerleading squad, the Man Nanas. So everything about it is crazy. Like you go to the game and they open the game every time where they play the Lion King music, the Circle of Life, and they dress up a baby in a banana costume and they all hold it up like it's Simba. And everyone's like cheering and clapping. So he turns this team around. It was the most bankrupt, broke, like there was, 4,000 seats, 10 people showed up to a game. He's now sold out all 4,000 seats for the last 100 games in a row. He has a 12,000 person waiting list for tickets. He's been featured everywhere, ESPN, all over the place. In fact, he has 1.2 million TikTok followers, 200,000 more than the closest Major League Baseball team. So here's this guy with like no experience, no money, just a bunch of creativity. He applied these principles to the T, and he created this magical, unbelievable thing, the most fun you'll ever have in baseball, the Savannah Bananas.
That is awesome. That's awesome. And why did you cut him from the book? Yeah.
Well, it didn't make the book because I learned his story too late. And I interviewed him and I got to I'm friends with him. I actually went down to a game recently, but it was too late. It was right before press and I couldn't get it in. The book was already like 89,000 words. And I wish I did though. He's an amazing guy.
Oh, that's a great, great, great story. You told amazing stories in the book. And, I know I keep saying I love the book. I'm not blowing smoke. I'm telling you the truth. I really did enjoy it. All right. Well, I really appreciate you spending this time with us. Is there anything that you would like to say, like parting advice to the people who are listening? I mean, the people listening they all own businesses, different types of businesses. We've got technology business owners, we've got coaches, small business owners, big business owners, you name it. It's quite a diverse group.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the conversation and your wonderful comments. It's just a pleasure meeting you and spending time with you. So I'm deeply grateful. What I would say to the folks listening is that, I think it's our primary responsibility as leaders to build a culture of innovation. And whether you have 10 people or 100,000 people on your team, a core part of leadership today is cultivating and harnessing the creativity of every one of your folks, because that becomes a sustainable competitive advantage. And as the world continues to become more difficult to compete, this is the one thing that we can do to really cultivate and win. And the good news is that we all have it. That's a natural, innate ability of every human being. We just have to help them connect to it and unlock that dormant creative capacity. And the example I often say is like, imagine that if you learn outside of your business on a piece of land that you owned, there was an oil well there. You didn't even know it. It turns out there's $1 billion of oil sitting in there. You own it. The first thing you'd be like, oh my God, I'm going to go tap that, like for sure. Yet I would argue that most of us have an oil well of opportunity inside our businesses that we don't tap, which is the dormant creative capacity of our team. Let's tap it. Let's build a culture that supports it. Let's double down on our ability to be creative, using inventive thinking and creative problem solving to seize our opportunities and tackle our biggest challenges. And I think that if you do that, there's no way that you're not going to be able to enjoy sustainable success.
That's awesome. Great advice. Thank you very, very much, Josh. It has been a pleasure to have you here and to have this conversation with you. It's like I want you in my back pocket for every idea I have in my business. And like I said, this will be a resource that continues to get used over and over again. And you may receive an email from me from time to time telling you how some of the ideas have been put into practice and the results that have come from them. I like to find, I asked you at the beginning, I told you about the problem that people have. They want to do everything in the book, and then they struggle to do the things that are in books. And so they end up not doing anything. And my goal with a book is always to figure out one idea. What's one thing that I can take from the book? And I can tell you that since I finished the book, one, we've got a project we're starting that is an experiment that we're running inside of the business. And two, I had a conversation with a client of mine who has a new book coming out in September, and their market is very much a LinkedIn market. They don't do a lot on Instagram, and we're doing an experiment with Instagram, a low labor, low effort experiment just to see kind of what the response is. So definitely one of my biggest takeaways has been just to experiment with some little things to see, what kind of changes I can affect. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the great book and for sharing everything that you shared with us today. I really appreciate it.
Warms my heart. Seriously, thank you again. And by the way, I forgot to mention, maybe you can include in the notes or whatever, but if anyone really wants to get started on their creativity, just check out biglittlebreakthroughs.com. You can buy the book, but even if you don't, there's a bunch of free stuff there. There's an assessment tool, there's downloadable worksheets, there's a whole bunch of quick start guide. So if you're looking for some resources to get started on boosting creativity for you and your team members, check out biglittlebreakthroughs.com.
Yes, absolutely. And we will put that in when we upload this to our community. We will add that link as a resource. I know that Cass on my team has downloaded all of the resource, and she was actually telling me before you joined us how blown away she was. She's like, it's like a whole other book. She said there's like 30 different downloads. He's gone over and like above and beyond in terms of the resources that you provided. So thank you for wrapping up with that so that we can remind everyone.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks again.
Thanks again, Josh. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Take care.